The morning sun rose slowly over the small town, its light spilling between the cracks of tall buildings and empty alleys. The streets were starting to fill with people heading to work, holding their coffees and checking their phones. But in one quiet corner near an old brick wall sat a man most people walked past without noticing. His name was Daniel. Daniel had been living on the streets for almost 3 years. He slept behind an abandoned bakery near the town's oldest neighborhood, a place most people avoided because the buildings looked like they could fall apart at any time. His only belongings were a worn-out backpack, a thin blanket, and a photograph wrapped carefully in plastic. In that picture were a younger Daniel, his wife, and a little girl smiling in front of a lake. That was before everything changed. Once Daniel had a steady job in construction. He worked hard every day, building homes and fixing things with pride. He wasn't rich, but he was content. He used to say that a man's worth wasn't in his money, but in his hands, what he could make or fix. But one afternoon, while working on a building site, a heavy beam slipped and crushed his leg. The injury ended his career. The company paid him a small amount, but the hospital bills and the recovery time drained it quickly. Then the rent fell behind. His wife couldn't handle the pressure, and one by one, everything he loved slipped away. Still, Daniel never turned bitter. Life on the streets taught him to be humble, to appreciate small things. A warm meal, a kind word, even just a smile from a stranger. Every morning he'd go around collecting cans and bottles, earning a few coins to buy bread and coffee. Sometimes the lady at the bakery would hand him a leftover roll with a shy smile, pretending she was just cleaning up. He'd always thank her like it was a gift from heaven. Despite how he looked and clothes worn out, beard untrimmed, Daniel carried himself with quiet dignity. He often helped the other homeless people around. If someone lost their blanket, he shared his. If a new person showed up, confused and scared, Daniel showed them where to find food or a safe place to sleep. People in that part of town trusted him. He was their quiet guardian, but not everyone saw it that way. There were also those who wrinkled their noses when they saw him or whispered as they passed. To them, he was just another failure of society. Daniel had learned to ignore it. The world moved fast, and people rarely looked down long enough to see those who had fallen. That morning, as Daniel sat sipping his cup of hot water from the cafe that sometimes felt pity for him, a shiny black car stopped nearby. From it stepped Evelyn Carter, one of the richest women in town. She was dressed in a white coat, her hair perfectly styled, and her shoes so polished they caught the sunlight. Evelyn owned several businesses, including Carter Development, the company responsible for renovating old parts of the town. She was known for her success and her cold confidence. To most, she was someone to be respected, even feared. Evelyn had grown up in comfort. Her father had built the company from nothing, and when he passed, she took it over, turning it into one of the most powerful firms in the region. She believed in hard work, discipline, and results. What she didn't believe in were excuses, especially from people who, in her eyes, didn't try hard enough. That morning, she was there to inspect a block of old buildings her company had just bought. They were planning to tear them down and build luxury apartments. She walked with her assistant, holding a folder of papers and pointing at things with a pen. To her, these old walls were just numbers on a sheet: profit, investment, progress. She didn't see the people who had once lived there, or the memories the place held. Daniel noticed her as she walked near the bakery's broken wall. He had seen her before, always in fancy cars, always busy. She looked out of place here, like a diamond dropped in the dirt. But what caught Daniel's eye wasn't her. It was the wall behind her. He knew that wall. For weeks he had seen small cracks spreading across it. Every time it rained, the bricks darkened and loosened a little more. He'd told some of the street cleaners to stay away from it, but no one else seemed to care. It was just another forgotten piece of the town. As Evelyn's assistant took pictures and made notes, Daniel stood up and walked toward them, limping slightly. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said softly. His voice was calm but serious. Evelyn turned, slightly startled. Her assistant stepped closer, frowning at Daniel's ragged clothes. Daniel pointed to the wall. "You should stay back from there. That thing's been shifting for weeks. It's not safe." Evelyn blinked, clearly surprised that a homeless man was giving her advice. She looked at the wall briefly, then back at him. "Thank you, but we're fine," she said politely but distantly. Daniel didn't move. I'm serious, ma'am. One strong wind and it could fall. Her assistant sighed impatiently. We appreciate your concern, sir, but this area is under inspection. Please step away. Daniel frowned. He wasn't trying to cause trouble, he just didn't want to see anyone hurt. But he saw the way they looked at him, like he didn't belong there, like his words meant nothing because of his appearance. He hesitated, then slowly backed away, still watching the wall with worry. As they turned back to their notes, Daniel muttered to himself, "One day that wall's gonna come down, and someone's gonna get hurt." He walked to his corner again, shaking his head. The day grew hotter and the street buzzed with noise. Construction trucks moved in the distance and people hurried past without paying attention. Daniel watched as Evelyn continued inspecting other buildings, always checking her phone, always in control. But as the afternoon clouds rolled in, the wind began to pick up. The old neighborhood creaked like a tired ship. Daniel could feel it, the uneasy groan of walls that had stood too long. He gathered his few belongings, preparing to move under a safer roof for the evening. As he picked up his backpack, he heard a sharp cracking sound. He looked up. It came from the same wall he had warned about. Evelyn and her assistant were standing just a few feet from it, unaware of what was about to happen. Daniel's heart jumped. Without thinking, he dropped everything and ran toward them, shouting, "Move away! Now!" They turned, startled, but before they could react, Daniel reached them. He grabbed Evelyn's arm and pulled her back hard, just as the top of the wall gave way. The sound was like thunder. Bricks and dust exploded into the street. The assistant fell backward, covering his head. Evelyn gasped as Daniel shielded her with his body, pushing her behind a parked car. For a few seconds, everything was silent except for the settling dust. Daniel coughed, his arms scraped and bleeding, his clothes covered in debris. Evelyn stared at him in disbelief. He had just saved her life. People from nearby shops came running. Someone shouted for help, another called the police. The assistant helped Evelyn stand while Daniel leaned against the car, breathing heavily. When the paramedics arrived, they checked Evelyn first. Just a few scratches. Nothing serious. But Daniel's arms were bleeding badly. When the medics tried to take him to the ambulance, he shook his head. "I'm fine," he said weakly. "Just make sure she's okay." Evelyn looked at him then, really looked. Not at his clothes or his dirt-covered face, but at the man himself. There was something honest in his eyes, something brave. "Please," she said softly. "You need help too." He smiled faintly. "I've had worse." The assistant, still shaken, stared at Daniel as if seeing him for the first time. Around them, people were whispering, taking photos, posting on their phones. In a matter of minutes, the story was spreading. A homeless man had saved one of the richest women in town from a collapsing wall. As the ambulance drove away, Daniel sat quietly on the curb, holding a bandage around his arm. Evelyn watched from her car window before they took her to the hospital. She couldn't stop thinking about his eyes, calm, tired, yet full of something she hadn't seen in a long time, genuine goodness. The next day, the newspapers would call him the homeless hero. But that night, Daniel didn't know about any of it. He just lay under the stars, the same as every night, whispering a small prayer of thanks, not for himself, but because no one had died that day, and somewhere, in a bright hospital room, Evelyn Carter couldn't sleep either. She kept hearing his voice, warning her about the wall and the way he had thrown himself in harm's way without hesitation. For the first time in years, she felt something she couldn't describe: guilt, gratitude, and a strange warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. She didn't know it yet. But that single moment, the wall, the dust, and the stranger's hand pulling her to safety, was about to change everything in her life. The next morning, the town was buzzing. The story of a homeless man saving a rich businesswoman had spread faster than anyone expected. Local newspapers printed it on the front page. Social media was full of photos, and people in cafes couldn't stop talking about it. Some said it was unbelievable. Others said it was inspiring, that maybe it was a reminder not to judge people by how they look. But for Daniel, none of that mattered. He didn't even know about the story going viral. After the accident, he had refused to stay at the hospital, leaving once the doctors patched up his arms. He spent the night under the same bridge he'd always slept beneath, his jacket torn and body aching. He had only one thought. He was just glad that woman hadn't been hurt. The next day, as he walked through town, people were looking at him differently. Some even nodded or smiled. The man at the bakery who used to ignore him handed him a coffee and said, "On the house, hero." Daniel blinked, surprised, unsure what to say. He didn't feel like a hero. He had just done what anyone with a heart would do. Later that morning, a small crowd gathered near the collapsed wall. City workers were clearing the debris and news reporters were filming. Daniel stood at a distance, watching quietly. He could hear one of the reporters saying, "The victim, businesswoman Evelyn Carter, was rescued by a local homeless man who risked his life to pull her from danger. Authorities are calling it a miracle." Daniel sighed softly and turned away. He didn't want attention. He just wanted peace, and maybe a warm place to rest. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat in her office, her arm wrapped in a bandage. She couldn't concentrate on her work. Her assistant had handled most of her meetings, but her mind was somewhere else, back in that moment when the wall had fallen and a stranger had grabbed her hand. For years, Evelyn had lived by strict rules: focus on work, don't show weakness, always stay in control. But since that accident, she couldn't stop thinking about the man who saved her. His voice, his eyes, the way he didn't ask for anything afterward. He hadn't even stayed to give his name. By afternoon, she made a decision. She called her assistant. "Find out who that man is," she said quietly. "The one who saved me." The assistant nodded, though he looked unsure. "Ma'am, I think the police didn't get his full name. They only called him Daniel and said he's one of the homeless people who live near the old bakery." Evelyn thought for a moment, then said, "Then that's where I'll go." Her assistant hesitated. "You to that area?" "Yes," she said firmly. "He saved my life. The least I can do is thank him properly." Later that day, Evelyn's black car stopped at the same old street where everything had happened. The wind carried the faint smell of dust and rain. People looked up as her car pulled over. It wasn't every day someone like her came to this part of town. Daniel was sitting on the curb, mending a torn sleeve with a small needle he'd found. When he saw the car door open and Evelyn step out, he froze. For a second, he thought she might have come to scold him for interfering or causing trouble, but instead she smiled nervously and walked toward him. "Hello," she said softly. "Do you remember me?" Daniel looked up, surprised by her tone. "Of course. You were there when the wall fell," she nodded. "I wanted to thank you. If it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened." Daniel gave a small shrug. "Anyone would have done the same, ma'am." "I don't think so," she said. "You risked your life for a stranger?" He smiled faintly. "Sometimes we don't have to think before doing what's right." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. She looked around. The broken buildings, the faded paint, the people sleeping in corners. For the first time, she saw the place through his eyes. Not as a business project, but as a place full of stories, people, and forgotten lives. She noticed his injured hands. "You should still be resting," she said. "Those wounds look bad." "I've had worse," he said again, that same humble tone she remembered. Evelyn took a deep breath. "At least let me buy you a proper meal, please." Daniel hesitated. He wasn't used to being invited anywhere. People usually avoided sitting next to him, let alone eating with him. But the sincerity in her eyes made him nod. "All right," he said quietly. They went to a small diner nearby, one that didn't care much about fancy clothes or appearances. The owner looked startled to see Evelyn walk in with Daniel, but quickly found them a seat. As they sat across from each other, there was a strange silence at first. Daniel kept glancing at the door, half expecting someone to tell him to leave. Evelyn ordered 2 plates of soup and bread. When the food arrived, Daniel hesitated before eating. It had been a long time since he'd sat at a table like that. "Go on," she said kindly. "It's just food." He smiled awkwardly and took a bite. The warmth spread through him, and for a moment he closed his eyes, remembering what it felt like to be human, not invisible, not pitied but seen. As they ate, Evelyn asked gently, "How long have you been out here?" Daniel thought for a moment. "About 3 years, maybe a little more. I used to work in construction. Got injured, lost my job, then my home. One thing led to another." Evelyn looked down, feeling a pang of guilt. "That must have been hard," he shrugged. "It was at first, but I learned to live with it. You'd be surprised how kind some people can be, even when they have nothing." There was another pause, this time comfortable, Evelyn studied him, his rough hands, tired face, and gentle eyes. He wasn't bitter or angry. If anything, he seemed at peace, like a man who had accepted his fate but never lost his heart. After they finished eating, Evelyn reached into her bag and placed an envelope on the table. "This is just a small thank you," she said. "Please take it." Daniel didn't even touch it. "I appreciate that, but I can't take your money." "It's not charity," she said quickly. "You saved my life," he shook his head. "That doesn't make me worth more than anyone else. I didn't do it for a reward." Evelyn looked at him, surprised again by his humility. "You really are something," she said softly. He smiled. "I'm just someone who had a bad turn in life. Happens to more people than you think." When they left the diner, the evening sky had turned golden. Evelyn stood beside her car, unsure what else to say. "I'll make sure that area is fixed properly," she said finally. "No one should get hurt there again." Daniel nodded. "That's good. Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "Would it be all right if I came by again? Maybe bring you some things you need?" Daniel looked unsure. "You don't owe me anything, ma'am." "I know," she said with a small smile. "But maybe I want to." He looked at her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right." As she drove away, Evelyn felt something shift inside her, something she hadn't felt in years. She had spent so much of her life building walls around herself, chasing success, thinking only of profits and progress. But now she found herself thinking about the people who lived behind those broken walls, people like Daniel. That night, she sat in her apartment staring at the city lights outside. Her phone buzzed with messages and news notifications, but she ignored them. All she could think about was the man who had risked his life for her without hesitation, and then refused her money. Somewhere in that quiet moment, Evelyn realized that her life, for all its luxury and comfort, felt empty compared to the peace she had seen in his eyes. Meanwhile, Daniel sat near his small fire under the bridge, holding the half-loaf of bread she'd given him to take home. He looked up at the sky and smiled faintly. The stars looked a little brighter that night. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time he felt seen. Not as a homeless man, but simply as a person. Neither of them knew it yet. But that simple meal, shared between two very different worlds, was just the beginning of something that would soon surprise the entire town. The news about the homeless hero kept spreading across town like wildfire. Every newspaper, local TV channel, and online post mentioned the story. People who had never noticed Daniel before were now talking about him as if they'd known him all along. His photo, taken by someone at the scene, showed him covered in dust with a tired smile. It touched everyone who saw it, but Daniel had no idea how famous he'd become. He didn't use phones or watch TV. To him, life was still the same, collecting bottles in the morning, sitting quietly by the bakery, and trying to stay warm when the nights grew cold. What had changed, though, were the faces around him. People he didn't know suddenly stopped to shake his hand or offer him food. A few even dropped money near his feet and said, "You deserve it, man." Daniel appreciated their kindness, but it also made him uneasy. He wasn't used to attention. All he'd ever wanted was peace, not praise. Meanwhile, Evelyn couldn't shake the thought of him from her mind. She had met hundreds of powerful people in her life, investors, politicians, business owners. Yet none had left an impression like Daniel did. Something about his honesty, his calm strength, and his refusal to take money made her feel both humbled and inspired. At work, things were different too. When she entered the office, her staff looked at her with quiet curiosity. They had all read the news. To them, it was shocking that their confident, untouchable boss had been saved by a homeless man. Her assistant, who had been with her for years, asked carefully, "Ma'am, are you all right talking about what happened? Reporters are asking if you'd like to make a statement." Evelyn thought for a moment. "I don't want attention," she said. "But I want people to know who he really is, not just as a story, but as a person." That afternoon, she stood before a group of reporters outside her office building. Cameras flashed, microphones hovered near her face. She spoke calmly but with emotion. "Yes, it's true," she said. "A man named Daniel saved my life. He's been living on our streets for years, and yet, in that moment, he showed more courage and kindness than most of us ever do. I owe him my life, and I intend to make sure he gets the help he deserves." The crowd clapped. Reporters asked more questions, but Evelyn said no more. She didn't want the story to turn into gossip or a charity stunt. She wanted it to mean something real. Later that evening, she drove back to the old part of town again. She found Daniel sitting under the same streetlight, quietly fixing a torn shoe. When she got out of the car, he looked up and smiled faintly. "Back again?" he asked gently. She nodded. "I hope I'm not bothering you." "Not at all," he said. "Most people don't bother talking twice." She walked closer and handed him a small paper bag. "It's some food. I didn't know what you liked, so I brought a bit of everything." He accepted it gratefully. "Thank you. You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," she said. Then after a pause, she added, "I spoke to the press today. About you." He looked surprised. "About me?" "Yes, people should know the truth and that you're not just some headline but a man with a story." He sighed softly. "I don't know if I like being a story. I'm just trying to live my life." "I understand," she said. "But maybe this story can change things. For you and maybe for others too." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. "Maybe, but change doesn't come easy. People forget fast," she nodded. "Then we'll remind them." From that day, Evelyn started visiting Daniel more often. At first, she brought him food, clothes, and blankets. But soon it wasn't about things anymore. It was about conversations. They talked about life, choices, and regrets. Daniel told her about the accident that ended his career. How he had once been proud of building homes for others, never thinking one day he'd have none of his own. How he'd lost contact with his family, too ashamed to call them after everything fell apart. Evelyn listened, her heart heavy. She had always thought success came only from hard work and discipline, but now she realized that life could change for anyone, no matter how strong or prepared they were. In return, she told him about her own loneliness, how wealth had given her everything except peace. She confessed that most nights she went home to an empty apartment, where the silence felt heavier than any burden. Daniel listened quietly and said, "Maybe we both lost something. You lost people, I lost a place, but we're both still here. That means we've still got time to make things right." That night, Evelyn went home feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Over the next few weeks, the story continued to grow. Donations started pouring into the town's homeless shelter. Volunteers came to help. People began organizing food drives and clothing collections. For the first time, the town looked at its less fortunate residents not with pity, but with respect. Evelyn decided to take things further. She called a meeting with her company's board members. They gathered around the long glass table, curious about why she'd called them on short notice. "I want to start a new project," she said firmly. "We'll renovate the old district, but not for luxury apartments, for affordable housing, a place where people like Daniel can have a second chance." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. One of them spoke up. "That area won't bring profit, ma'am. We'd be investing millions with little return." Evelyn looked at him calmly. "Not everything worth doing has to make a profit. Sometimes it's about doing what's right." There was silence. Some of them still disagreed, but they could see the determination in her eyes. She wasn't asking for approval. She was telling them how it would be. After the meeting, her assistant approached her. "You've changed," he said quietly. Evelyn smiled. "Maybe I'm just finally seeing things clearly." A few days later, she met Daniel again, bringing him the news. When she told him about her plan, he looked at her with disbelief. "You're serious?" he asked. "Completely," she said. "I want to build homes for people who need them most. And I want your help." "My help?" "Yes," she said. "You know this area better than anyone. You know what people here need. I want you to work with me and help me make this real." Daniel stared at her, speechless. For years, he'd been invisible. Now someone wanted him to be part of something again, something that mattered. "I don't know what to say," he finally whispered. "Say yes," she said gently. "We'll figure out the rest together." After a long pause, he nodded. "All right, I'll do it." From that day, things began to change for Daniel. Evelyn arranged for him to stay in a small guest room behind her company's office. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and warm. She also got him new clothes and helped him get his ID replaced so he could work again. The first night he slept on an actual bed, Daniel couldn't hold back his tears. For 3 years, he'd slept on cold ground, always half awake, afraid someone might steal his things. Now he lay staring at the ceiling, still in disbelief that it was real. The next morning, Evelyn came by to check on him. "How was your first night?" she asked with a smile. He grinned, his eyes glistening. "It was strange. I kept thinking someone would tell me to leave." She shook her head. "No one's sending you away, Daniel. Not anymore." They began working together on the new project. Daniel would walk through the old streets with the architects, pointing out which buildings could be saved and which ones were too damaged. His knowledge from years in construction proved valuable. The workers respected him, even though they didn't know his full story at first. They just saw how skilled and humble he was. When Evelyn visited the site, she often found him helping the younger workers, showing them how to reinforce a wall or measure properly. He never acted like a boss, and he was one of them. Weeks passed, and slowly the old district began to transform. The broken walls were rebuilt, new roofs went up, and for the first time in years, the place felt alive again. Every evening, as the sun set over the town, Evelyn and Daniel would stand together, watching the workers pack up for the day. They didn't say much, they didn't need to. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken gratitude and friendship. Evelyn sometimes thought about how strange life was. Just a few months ago, she wouldn't have believed she'd be here, standing beside a man who had once been homeless, planning a future for others like him. But now she couldn't imagine her life without this purpose. Daniel, too, had changed. He no longer looked down when he walked. He carried himself with quiet pride again. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was living. And as the town watched the changes unfold, people began to talk about something bigger than a rescue story. They started calling it a miracle, not the kind that happens in an instant, but the kind that grows slowly through kindness, courage, and second chances. Neither Daniel nor Evelyn knew it yet. But the biggest surprise was still ahead, something that would touch every heart in the town, and prove that a single act of goodness could truly change everything. The weeks turned into months, and the old part of town began to change in ways no one thought possible. The once abandoned streets were now full of workers' laughter, and the sound of hammers rebuilding walls that had been broken for years. What used to be a forgotten place was now a symbol of hope. Daniel worked every day on the project. He arrived early, long before most of the crew, and stayed until sunset. Even though his hands still hurt from the old injury, he refused to rest. He said it felt good to build again, to see something new rise where there had once been only decay. People in town started recognizing him not as the homeless hero, but simply as Daniel, the man helping to rebuild their community. He had become a quiet inspiration to many. Young workers often gathered around him, asking for advice or listening to his stories about life before everything fell apart. Daniel always told them the same thing. What matters most is not how many times you fall, but how many times you get up. Evelyn visited the site almost every day too. She would walk through the area, checking progress, talking with the workers, and making sure things were done safely. But her visits were never just about work. She enjoyed talking to Daniel. She admired his humility and how he treated everyone with respect no matter who they were. One afternoon, she found him sitting on a pile of bricks, eating lunch from a small paper bag. She smiled and sat beside him. "You never take a proper break, do you?" she said gently. He grinned. "Old habits. When I worked construction before, I always ate on site. Never liked sitting around too long." She watched him for a moment, then said, "You know, everyone here looks up to you." He laughed softly. "I doubt that. They just see an old man who can still swing a hammer." "No," she said seriously. "They see someone who never gave up." "That's rare." Daniel looked down, a little shy. "I almost did once, but then someone reminded me I still had something to give." Evelyn smiled faintly, realizing he was talking about her. There was a comfortable silence between them. The wind carried the scent of dust and fresh wood. It was peaceful, something neither of them had felt in a long time. Evelyn turned to him again. "You know, Daniel, when we first met, I saw you as just another face on the street. But now I think meeting you was one of the best things that ever happened to me." He looked surprised. "Why's that?" "Because you made me see what really matters," she said softly. "For years I only cared about business, profits, and numbers. But you showed me that people are what truly matter. You changed how I see the world." Daniel looked at her for a long time, then smiled. "Maybe we both learned something then. You gave me a reason to start again." Their friendship had grown deep, built not on wealth or status, but respect and understanding. People in the company began to notice. Some whispered about it, wondering why their powerful boss spent so much time with a man who used to live on the streets. But Evelyn didn't care what anyone thought. For the first time, she felt she was doing something meaningful. As the project continued, Evelyn also started new programs, small but powerful. She launched a training initiative to help people who were struggling to find jobs, including those who had been homeless or unemployed for years. Daniel helped lead the training, teaching basic construction skills and safety. He became not just a worker but a mentor. The local newspaper did another story about him, this time not about saving a life, but about changing lives. The article called him a man who turned his pain into purpose. When he read it, Daniel just smiled and said, "I guess that's one way to put it." But even with all the progress, Daniel sometimes felt uneasy. He had spent so long living alone and surviving day by day that the idea of having stability again felt strange. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he and Evelyn stood outside one of the nearly finished buildings. The walls were painted, the windows were clean, and the rooms inside were ready for families to move in soon. Evelyn looked at the building proudly. "Can you believe this place will be filled with people soon?" "Children playing, families laughing." Daniel nodded, his eyes soft. "It's hard to imagine, but it feels good to know I had a hand in it." She turned to him. "You had more than a hand in it. This wouldn't exist without you." He smiled faintly. "You give me too much credit." "Not enough," she said firmly. For a moment they stood quietly, watching the orange sky fade into pink. Then Daniel spoke again, his voice a little uncertain. "You ever think about how strange life is? How people from two completely different worlds can cross paths and change each other's lives?" Evelyn nodded slowly. "Every day." She didn't say it out loud, but she knew she'd been changed more than she could ever explain. The opening ceremony for the new housing project was scheduled for the following month. The mayor, reporters, and dozens of townspeople were expected to attend. Evelyn wanted Daniel to stand with her at the front, but he wasn't sure. "I'm not really a speech kind of person," he said with a nervous laugh when she told him. "You don't need a speech," she said. "You just need to be there. You're the reason all this happened." He shook his head. "No, you're the one who made it possible. I just gave you a push." Evelyn smiled. "Then come stand beside me while we thank everyone else." He finally agreed, though he felt nervous about it. As the big day approached, the town's excitement grew. Posters were put up around the streets showing pictures of the new homes, with a quote that read, "Every person deserves a second chance." Evelyn insisted that Daniel's photo be included too, even though he protested. The night before the event, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat by the window of his small room, staring at the city lights in the distance. He thought about his past, the mistakes, the loss, the loneliness, and then about how far he'd come. It all felt unreal. He picked up the old photograph he still kept in his backpack, the one of his wife and daughter. He hadn't seen them in years. He had tried once to find them but stopped, afraid they wouldn't want to see him. But now, for the first time, he felt like maybe he could try again someday. Maybe they could be proud of him. The next morning, the weather was perfect. The sun shone brightly and the air was filled with the sound of people gathering. The stage was set, decorated with banners and flowers. Evelyn stood near the microphone, greeting officials and townsfolk. When she saw Daniel walking toward her, dressed in clean clothes and a small smile, her face lit up. "You made it," she said warmly. "Wouldn't miss it," he replied. The crowd clapped as the ceremony began. Evelyn spoke first, thanking everyone for their hard work and dedication. Then she turned to Daniel. "And finally," she said, "there's someone I need to thank more than anyone else. A man who reminded me that compassion is more powerful than money, and that hope can come from the most unexpected places. Please welcome Daniel." The crowd erupted in applause. Daniel stepped forward, nervous but smiling. He looked at all the faces in front of him, some familiar, some strangers, and took a deep breath. "I don't have much to say," he began. "I just want to thank all of you for believing in this. A few months ago, I was invisible. I didn't think anyone saw me. But then something happened that changed everything. I realized that people can still care, that kindness still exists. And if we keep showing it, maybe this world can be a better place for everyone." The crowd cheered, some even wiping away tears. Evelyn's eyes glistened with pride. After the ceremony, families began moving into the new homes. Children ran through the halls, laughing and shouting with joy. Daniel watched from a distance, his heart full. Evelyn stood beside him and whispered, "Look at what you've done." He shook his head gently. "Look at what we've done." As the day faded and the crowd slowly left, Evelyn and Daniel walked down the street together, now lined with fresh paint and blooming flowers. The town had been transformed, not just in appearance but in spirit. People were kinder, more connected, more aware of one another. Evelyn smiled as they walked. "You know, Daniel, this is only the beginning. There's so much more we can do." He nodded, his eyes calm and hopeful. "Then let's keep building." The sun dipped low in the sky, casting a golden light over the new homes. The two of them stood there quietly side by side, two people from completely different worlds, now united by something far greater than wealth or status. Neither of them knew it. But the biggest surprise was still to come, because sometimes when you give the world kindness, it finds a way to return it in ways you could never imagine. The morning of the grand opening came quietly. The sky was painted a light shade of gold and the sound of birds echoed through the town. There was a sense of calm, the kind that comes before something big, something that would be remembered for years. Daniel woke up early, long before the ceremony. He sat at the edge of his bed, the same small room Evelyn had helped him rent. The room was simple, a small bed, a table, a chair, and a few old photographs he had kept safe for years. He looked around and a soft smile appeared on his face. It was still hard for him to believe that this was his life now. A warm bed, a roof over his head, and a sense of purpose. He looked into the mirror, running his hands over his face. The man who stared back wasn't the same one who had once lived under bridges and in empty alleys. His eyes still carried the weight of those years, but now they also carried peace, the kind that comes from being seen, from being given a second chance. After a quick breakfast, he stepped outside. The air was fresh and the streets were already coming alive. He could hear children laughing somewhere in the distance and smell the scent of bread from the bakery nearby. For the first time in a long time, the town felt alive, truly alive. When he reached the new housing complex, dozens of people were already gathered. Reporters with cameras, families waiting to move into their new homes, and townspeople who wanted to witness the event filled the street. There was music playing softly, and bright banners hung from the buildings with words that read, "Home for Hope, a new beginning." Evelyn stood near the entrance, greeting guests with her usual calm smile. But today there was something different about her, a glow of pride and gratitude. When she saw Daniel walking toward her, she waved and hurried over. "You're early," she said warmly. He smiled. "Old habit. I like seeing things before the crowd gets too big." She nodded, looking around. "It's amazing, isn't it?" All of this started because of one moment. Daniel looked at the buildings, freshly painted and filled with laughter, and said softly, "Yeah, one moment can change everything." As more people arrived, the event began. The mayor gave a short speech, thanking everyone involved in the project and praising Evelyn for her leadership. But Evelyn quickly shifted the attention to Daniel. She walked up to the microphone, her voice steady but full of emotion. "This project isn't just about buildings," she said. "It's about people. It's about hope. And none of this would have been possible without one man's courage and kindness. Months ago, when a wall collapsed, a man with nothing risked everything to save me. That moment changed my life and I believe the life of this entire town. Daniel, would you please join me?" The crowd turned and clapped as Daniel slowly walked onto the stage. He looked a little shy, but he smiled when he saw the people cheering for him. Evelyn handed him the microphone and the applause slowly faded. "I'm not used to speaking in front of so many people," he began, rubbing the back of his neck with a nervous chuckle. "But I just want to say thank you, and to all of you. When I was living on the streets, I thought I was invisible. I thought no one cared. But that day, everything changed. And now, standing here, seeing all of this, I realize something. Sometimes you lose everything so you can find what really matters. I lost my home once, but today I helped build one for others. And that means more to me than anything." The crowd erupted into applause, some even wiping away tears. People who once walked past Daniel without noticing him now looked at him with admiration and respect. Evelyn placed a hand on his shoulder. "You gave this town back its heart," she said softly. As the ceremony continued, families began to receive their house keys. One by one, people stepped forward. Mothers with children, elderly couples, and young workers. Each family had their own story of struggle and survival. Evelyn and Daniel personally handed them their keys, shaking hands, offering smiles, and sharing in their joy. A young boy ran up to Daniel, clutching his new house key tightly. "Thank you, sir," the boy said excitedly. "My mom says we don't have to sleep in the car anymore." Daniel knelt down to the boy's level and smiled. "You take care of that key, all right? It opens more than a door. It opens a new life." The boy nodded proudly and ran back to his mother, who gave Daniel a tearful smile. As the afternoon went on, music played, food was served, and laughter filled the streets. The whole town seemed lighter, as if a heavy cloud that had hung over it for years had finally lifted. People who once ignored one another now talked, shared stories, and helped each other. Something deep had shifted in the town's spirit. Later that evening, when the sun began to set, the crowd slowly started to leave. The golden light fell over the new homes, making them glow softly. Evelyn and Daniel stayed behind, walking quietly through the neighborhood. The smell of fresh paint mixed with the scent of flowers from the nearby park. "It feels different now," Evelyn said after a while. "The town, I mean. It feels alive again." Daniel nodded. "It's because people finally started to care. That's what makes a place come alive." They stopped near one of the benches. Evelyn turned to him. "You've done something incredible, Daniel. You've given people hope. You've even changed me," he smiled gently. "We all helped each other. You gave me a chance. I just tried to make the most of it." Evelyn looked at him thoughtfully. "What will you do now?" Daniel paused for a moment. "I think I'll keep working here. Maybe help start more projects like this one. There are still so many people out there who need a hand. And maybe someday I'll try to find my family again." She smiled warmly. "I think they'd be proud of you." He looked out at the glowing homes and said quietly, "I hope so." As night settled in, the street lights flickered on, bathing the area in a soft, yellow glow. Children played outside their new homes, their laughter echoing through the air. It was a sound of new beginnings, of life starting over. The town's newspaper ran another headline the next morning: "Homeless Hero Helps Build Hope, a Town Reborn." The story spread beyond the small town, reaching nearby cities and inspiring many others. People began visiting to learn from the project, how compassion, when turned into action, could change an entire community. A few weeks later, Daniel received a letter. It was old-fashioned, handwritten, with no return address. When he opened it, his hands trembled. Inside was a short note. "I read about you in the newspaper. We're so proud of you. We always believed you'd find your way back. Please come visit us when you can. Love, Lily and Claire." Daniel sat there in silence, his eyes filling with tears. It was from his wife and daughter, the family he thought he had lost forever. That evening, he found Evelyn and showed her the letter. She read it and smiled, her eyes glistening. "You see?" she said softly. "Kindness always finds its way back." Daniel couldn't speak for a moment. Finally, he said quietly, "I guess this story isn't over yet." Evelyn nodded. "No, it's just the beginning." Weeks later, Daniel took a small bus out of town. The workers and townspeople gathered to see him off. Evelyn stood beside him, holding his hand. "You'll come back, won't you?" she asked. "Of course," he said with a warm smile. "This place is part of me now. But first I need to go home." As the bus drove away, the people waved, cheering and clapping. Evelyn watched until it disappeared down the road, her heart full. When Daniel finally reached his destination, he stepped off the bus and looked around. It was a quiet neighborhood with flowers growing along the fences. He walked slowly up to a small house, his hands shaking slightly. The door opened and there they were. His wife Lily and his daughter, now a grown woman. No words were needed. They simply hugged. A long, tearful embrace that healed years of pain in seconds. Back in town, Evelyn continued the work they had started together. She expanded the program, building more homes and helping more families. But in every new project, she made sure to include a plaque that read, "Inspired by a man who believed that hope can rebuild anything." Months later, Daniel returned, not as a homeless man, not even as a worker, but as a friend, a teacher, and a symbol of what kindness can do. The town gathered once again, this time not to celebrate buildings, but to celebrate life. And as he stood there, surrounded by people smiling, laughing, and living in homes that once seemed impossible, Daniel felt something deep inside. Peace. He looked up at the sky, the same one he had slept under for years, and whispered softly, "Thank you." Because in the end, it wasn't just a story about saving a woman from a collapsing wall. It was a story about saving an entire town, and himself, from falling apart. And that's what truly shocked the town. That sometimes, the greatest change comes from the most unexpected heart.